Good morning, welcome back. This is Daybreak and thank you for staying with us, talking about food security and the status here in Kenya and some of the policies that ought to be adopted to make the country food secure. 29th of September is the International Day of Awareness of Food Loss and Wastage, and of course this is the 16th October is the day that the world celebrates the World Food Day. Ending food insecurity in Kenya will be our topic of discussion here this morning. And with me in the studio, as I have earlier mentioned, on my immediate right is Professor Richard Odwor. He's the chairperson of the Kenya University Biotechnology Consortium. Good morning, Prof.
Good morning.
Thanks for your time. Next to him is Lucy Sembei, the Programs Manager, Food Security at the Kenya Red Cross Society. Thanks for your time. Next to her is Jacqueline Cohen, the Resilience Ambassador, Alliance for Science. Thank you and good morning. As well as Professor George Abong, who is the chairperson of the Department of Food Science at the University of Nairobi. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time. First to you, Professor Richard Odwor. I mean, it's going to be an expansive one, a conversation around how we can change the discourse, demystify some of the held perceptions about how we can turn around the agriculture sector in the country and make Kenyans food secure, because it informs a lot, it addresses poverty. I mean, one fundamental question remains. Why is Kenya, after all these years, nearly 60 years after independence, why are we plagued by the problem of food insecurity?
Thank you. And again, I thank Citizen TV for inviting me. And it's always a pleasure to sit here and discuss matters food. Clearly, and I serve Kenyatta University as the Registrar Research, Innovation and Outreach. What I think is very important to understand is the dynamics around food security. And the debate is getting more expansive, because it's just no longer about the quantity of food, but it's getting also becoming more important to discuss the quality of food. And therefore, previously we were running to get enough food, but now we have even the challenge to get the quality of food. So with that put together, and in the face of climate change, we are sitting on a time bomb, and therefore there is urgent need to start looking very actively on the mechanisms of ensuring that we have sufficient food. And this therefore speaks to many things, including what are all the intervening factors between the preparation of the soil to the end product that gets into our plate for eating. And that is a long value chain that we need to speak to, starting from the soils, the seed we plant, the agronomic traits during the farm time, and even the harvesting, and even post-harvesting. So all that is, is an area that we really need to discuss in terms of what technologies are we employing, what are the policies, are we, appreciating the kind of the changes that we are seeing in the environment, and even the attitude of the youth. Our farmers are aging, we have a population that is growing, so it's compounded, and I think we'll have the opportunity to break this down very well in the sitting here.
Population growth vis-a-vis what appears to be no level of interest from the young people in engaging in agriculture, which to some extent speaks about the employment, acting as an important bureau for that matter. Coming to you, Jacqueline Cohen, then talk to me about how science can improve our status, because you have nearly a good percentage of Kenyans who are food insecure as we speak. Before we get the nitty-gritty details of what we need to do, as Prof has mentioned, what's the importance of science in the next course of drive to make Kenya food secure?
Thank you, and I need to state that at this point in time, this country should be going towards precision agriculture. Precision agriculture would mean that farmers know the quality of their soils, just as Professor says. And that takes science, really to know the quality of soils, the amount of water that they require, so that they know that from planting to harvest, how much, water they require. And basically just all the way through the value chain towards market systems and use of technology in, linkages to to market systems. So really, yes, at this point in time, science has to be incorporated in the food systems to ensure that from end to end of the value chains, there is a flow towards, from production to the markets.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lucy Sembei, then Red Cross has been in the forefront in reaching out to people who are food insecure, especially as we have witnessed during the heightened drought period in largely more than 20 counties. That is half of what we have in the country. Yeah. I mean, at what point do you think then there will be the departure and the takeoff from the current status we are in as a country to a food secure status?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think I will start by commenting on the fact that we need to start unlearning. And of course, tying with what Prof and Jackie said already, there's a lot of unlearning that needs to happen in this country for us to be able to embrace the new technologies that are coming into place, and of course, being able to influence how we are impacting on our food security sector. And so for me, it's looking at how community members are coming on board. Kenya Red Cross works very closely with communities. We live within the community members and we understand what challenges there are. So to what extent are we able to marry science, to marry what we see as the new approaches to be used in improving food security in the country, and of course making sure that that goes to the last mile, and how the community members are able to integrate what they are doing with the new learnings that have to be, of course, put in place for us to be able to realize change. So for me, that is a point of departure that we need to really focus on to realize a difference.
Okay. Professor Abong, coming to you. As our population expands, it appears that agriculture seems to be also lagging behind. I mean, the unfortunate bit is that we always have a government in place at any given time, and policies must be adopted thereof to support the agriculture sector in the country. Why then do you think is this consistent and what has been a common denominator of the lagging behind of the agriculture sector in the country, even as our population expands? Because the idea is that the government also understands that while we have a population growth which is expanding after the census is done, it ought to be also doing commensurate efforts to boost the agriculture sector, which hasn't been happening over time. How do we get out of the current situation?
Thank you very much. And listening to my colleagues, I would agree much more. But talking about population, we understand that this population will continue to grow. And in Kenya and developing countries, for every one death, you still have 2 to 3 births. So if you look at the global perspective, the UN projects this population, which is currently at 8 billion, slightly above, to 9.7 to 10 B. So as you rightly put it, the population is surely growing. So the question is, why are there policies and why are we lagging behind? The first thing is the question of how much do we adopt the technology? Whether you talk of technology transferred from anywhere else to the indigenous technology. How much do we evolve with that technology? So there is a little bit of lagging behind of adoption. And number 2, we may be having very good policies, but those policy implementation remains a challenge in terms of the grassroots implementation. And then the other question is, as you develop technologies, how much do people participate? And these days you see a lot of courts pulling out some of the policies or acts that have been developed without public participation. But the question of public participation remains a very big question, because how much are people really involved? So we always talk about participatory development of aspects. And so I believe that we need to look at this public participation so that it becomes participatory, and more so if it comes from the ground, what you say coming from the masses other than coming from top to down to them, because then they will be able to adopt. And number 2 is how much of the science and technology is reaching the common person who is supposed to use it. because if we develop science and technology and it is not being able to be used at the grassroots, then we will still have that lag. So there is a lot of things that are needed in between the policies, the science, and the people on the ground. And that needs to be a linkage, and that linkage needs to be seen from the time of developing those policies you are talking about.
And how can the linkages be adopted here? Because we need bridging between the three key areas you have mentioned. I mean, how can that be attained as an intellectual, as an individual who leads a key department in one of the most prestigious universities in the continent and around the world? I mean, at what point do you think we can have the effective bridging?
Well, as my colleagues talk about, there is what we call value chain. Yeah. And if you look at, for us to attain food security, we need to focus on the whole value chain. And value chain begins from the soil, as he says. And to me, who is in food science, we are doing value addition and looking at nutrition, how it is assimilated. So from the soil all the way to consumption, there are many players. And these players, you may not look at them in isolation. Mm-hmm. So whatever policies and whatever things you put in place, you must be able to ensure that you bring all of them on board. That is a daunting task, you believe me, but that is what you must do. If we have to bridge that, we must bring everybody on board and begin to look at each value chain as an important value chain with the different nodes, so that each person is brought on board, so that you are not going to target one, for example, one input. I believe that what the government has done on fertilizer is very good. But you see, if you look at the input supply alone, it is not all about fertilizer, because you still have the seed, all right? You still have the agronomic aspects. Okay, so if a farmer plants and there is no proper weeding, there is no rain, so what happens? So you can see it is a complex situation that we must be able to look at it holistically and then intentionally begin to invest along all the value chains.
Okay, Professor Richard, coming to you. Then talk to me about, I mean, the dichotomy here, because 60% of the world's arable land is in the African continent. Half of the population, more than 500 million people in the continent, I'm sure Kenyans included, go to bed hungry. I mean, why do you think that's the case?
Thank you. And if you allow me a bit of latitude, then I can attempt to unpack the whole value chain so that we are able to understand this. Okay. The challenge that we are having in Kenya and probably in Africa starts from our own attitude and how we view food. And it starts from being rigid to what we are aware of or what we are used to. And I'll give you my own example. For instance, as a Luo, we are known to eat a lot of fish. Now, getting a Luo to start eating probably a githeri routinely becomes a problem. And there is nothing wrong with githeri, because it has still the same protein. And Prof. Abong will let you know that the proteins are proteins. They only have 20 amino acids. That doesn't change whether you are getting proteins from beans or you're getting it from fish. But look at the attitude towards that. And we are so rigid, we are not adventurers when it comes to food. Okay. You will realize that it takes many Africans and Kenyans probably a lot of time to start even enjoying seafood. If you look at those seals and prawns and they look like wings and with jackets, it doesn't look very good. And we are very conservative when it comes to food. And that therefore means that if, for instance, this country, if there is no maize, we claim that there is food insecurity. Yet there is cassava, there is sweet potato, and sorghum. All these things still provide the same nutrients that we require. So that is one aspect. Then if you want therefore to solve this problem that we have, because it has been solved in many places in the world, and there are technologies to do this, how do we look at, for instance, before we start planting, do we consume the data that is coming from meteorological? Previously we were told that there was going to be El Nino. So it wasn't surprising. So how prepared were we, first of all, to make decisions based on that? So were we prepared to take care of the water, like right now it's raining? How were we prepared in terms of the soil? When you look at the soil, it's not just enough to just dig. After digging, so what? What are you planting in that soil? And actually Jackie also mentioned about, when we talk about the soil, you will realize that, for instance, Northeastern is certainly dry, and probably Ukambani. why would you then insist on planting maize while you can plant jahi or sorghum, which is relevant to that, and leave maize for the Rift Valley where there's enough, rain? So how have we partitioned and profiled this country in a way that we get to know, yes, Northeastern is dry, therefore it's better off for jahe or for some sorghum, and we leave maize for Kitale and all this area. Then you partition again. Central, we see a lot of, waru and sweet Irish potato and all that. That's fine. So you deal with actually insisting, do what you are good at, then we will compare notes at the time when they are ready in the market. That you're done now with the soil preparation, and you need to check even the pH, the nutritional content of this, so that you know what do you add in there. You will realize that some soils have sufficient nutrients, but because fertilizer is now available, you still add it without even getting to understand what component are you enriching. Now your soil is ready, and you're ready to plant. What are you planting? What is the quality of the seed? Okay. Is it drought tolerant? Is it insect protected? Because like Abong is saying, Jackie and my colleagues here, when you plant maize that is drought tolerant and it rains, you have only solved the drought tolerance. You've not solved the problem about the pests that will come to enjoy your maize, for instance. So you need to deal with that. You have planted your maize, it's now growing. There are other agronomic things that need to happen. Does this plant that crop that you've planted require pruning? Okay. Does it require weeding? Weeding is a timed process. If you weed after probably 80% of the lifespan of that crop, then you are not helping in terms of yield. So you go through the process, weed, fertilizer, and all that. Then now you are ready to harvest. There is another aspect on that. Harvesting is also a timed thing. If you don't do the right things before harvesting, you will suffer from aflatoxin. So you have gotten a lot of food, but you have stored it wrongly. Aflatoxins here. And again, the losses, the post-harvest losses, if it's cassava, it takes 2-3 days, it dies. We are done with that. Post-harvest losses. Then, even after getting it, Abong comes in and tells you, how do you add value to it? It is maize. Can it become cornflakes? And therefore, at the end of it all, the storage system, the policies, the government strategy, excuse me, what do we sell now? What do we keep? What are the deficits? Because the country excuse me, should be able to project and get to know this is our population, this is what we have in the stores, and therefore look through all that process. So we talk about policy, we talk about farmers, we talk about the attitude to food and all the transporters and distribution of food. All these are important. And more importantly, what technologies are we adopting? Okay, technology, to be very clear, we'll talk about that because it's another entirely different area that has seen, countries prosper with regards to food security. Israel is a good example for that matter, which is semi-desert, but even exports surplus food out of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Coming to you, Lucy Sembei, Prof talks about what entirely needs to be done, and every stage he pointed out needs awareness and sensitization. For example, the harvesting so that you stave off the aflatoxin problem. In the case of the soil, understanding whether what you're planting is drought resistant. If so, in terms of the pesticides, then, at what point then can we create that awareness? And are farmers fully engaged here? Prof talked about participation, and they're key because if you look at 80% of the world food, it's by smallholder farmers who are producing this. Therefore, is there the right awareness about better seeds, fertilizer, and the capital to undertake this process?
Yeah, thank you very much, and I really appreciate what Prof talked about. I think I'll start a bit far behind because ideally, when we talk about changing the perceptions of the community members and helping them to be able to adapt to what we see as the appropriate farming technologies, I think we need to start with that change of attitude, because ideally when I was young, I was told to work very hard. And my mother kept saying, you need to read hard to never farm. How do we define success in this country, for example, starting from that point before we can move to what we need to do? White-collar jobs? Yeah, I was told to work very hard in school to make sure that I did not become a farmer. Yeah, because it's like they defined farming as an indication of failure. Yeah. And the professors are here, they will probably tell us how we can then, and that is why I talked about unlearning from the word go. How do I perceive farming from where I sit? If my son today came and said, I would like to become a farmer, would I support them to become farmers? Or am I supposed to probably reference to what I learned from my own mother and father and say that you cannot become a farmer because that will indicate that I've not supported you well, I've not schooled you enough to, of course, uptake a white-collar job and all that. So for me, it starts from what are the attitudes within the community members in terms of how we engage in farming. And he mentioned very rightly that we are already seeing a generational phase out. The people that are really passionate and engaged in farming are actually phasing out. So who are we handing this baton to as we move forward as a country? And are we likely to then come to a place where there's no one who is farming? So already, that is a challenge we need to already start addressing and educating our younger people and bringing them on board to appreciate farming as a way of living, as an income generating activity, because ideally we have quite a number of farmers in this country that are doing very well, that are earning income, through farming. Now, coming to your question, in terms of how we engage farmers and how awareness is created and all that, I think there's still a gap in this country. We still need to do a lot more in making sure that we make the information palatable. When I talk about looking at post-harvest losses, for example, and I tell the farmer, you need to do 12% moisture content of your grains before storing the grains. Is the farmer able to utilize that to make a decision? And I think I like what I've seen happening, even with the early warning information that we are sharing as Kenya Red Cross, where we tell farmers a lot about the predictions and all that and what they need to do, like what Prof talked about, that you need to do early maturing crops because we are looking at El Nino and all that. To what extent are we also addressing the other factors that influence decision making at community level? Because ideally, unless we can tackle that, if you are a pastorist, for example, and you're told about the fact that you're likely to lose your livestock to drought that is predicted already, are there other factors that are probably going to influence the decision you're going to make as a pastorist? How are we tackling such factors to make sure that the community members or the decisions that we think would probably influence the right direction are taken up by the community? So it's having conversations. Okay. And of course, allowing the community members to bring their voices on the table, allowing them to tell us what exactly they feel, what exactly they know. And of course, behavior change does not take a day or two. If you really need to change a lure from consuming fish alone into consuming beans, that is a journey you have to walk with them. A lot of sensitization, a lot of education, a lot of engaging, and of course giving them an opportunity to give their voice into the conversation. Okay. I think at times we go wrong because we want to just bring the information to them, pumping it to them, and not allowing them to tell us what exactly they think about the same information and what exactly they think would be the best way to use that information in decision making, but also in engaging into what we think they should engage into. So three things for me: making sure that the information we share out there is palatable, but starting with the attitude change. Okay. First of all, having them adapt the right attitude, and then they can take off with a positive mindset to engage into farming, to engage into the practices that we think are of course going to yield better production, but also having them take up the information and utilizing that information, tackling the other factors. Thank you.
When we get back from the break, Jacqueline Cohen and Professor Bong, the place of now the GMO debate entirely here, technology coming in as Prof has mentioned. And also talk about wastage, because the UN says 13% of food produced globally is lost between the harvesting process and retailing, from the farm to the fork. And 17%, according to the UN, is wasted at household level. Yet we are talking about food insecurity in Kenya, which informs poverty. I mean, to address the tag that is now as the Republic of Hunger, because it comes along the way and is tied largely to the quality of governance that we have at any given point. This is Daybreak, and thank you for staying with us. The hashtag on X is Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. When we get back from the break, the discussion continues here on the broadcast. Stay tuned.